Kia ora, welcome to the first series of Stuff That Matters Now, a podcast brought to you by Collective Intelligence. The title says it all, Stuff That Matters Now. Business as usual is no longer an option, peeps, and we need to do stuff differently. I'm Harv, aka Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and it's going to be my great pleasure in this series to introduce to you a bunch of really cool people who are making a difference in the world every single day. Our job here at Collective Intelligence is to help curious people evolve and become more courageous so they can tackle the stuff that's needed to make this world a better place. You can find us at www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz and check us out on social media. You're about to listen to an epic chat I've just had with one of our many change-making Collective Intelligence members. Together, we dig into fun stuff, the rugged stuff, the complete stuff-ups that have helped them evolve and contribute to how we as Aotearoa New Zealand are doing things differently. Let's have a quick listen to a wee clip of some of the stuff we've talked about to give you an idea of what's ahead.
Because you realise you're in a room and you think, God, I'm at Harvard and imposter syndrome, right? I'm the Friesenberger himself. I'm like, how the hell did I get in? And you realise that the person on the side of me was literally the advisor to the President of the United States on nuclear arms policy, and this one was the former Minister of the Economy for the Ukraine or something. And I wouldn't have lent that guy $10. And you realise that we're all it, right? You know, we are the people we're waiting for. That wonderful phrase. The world is run, one way or another, at all levels, by you and me.
Yeah. So
with all our foibles and flaws and fears, and our positive attributes and intentions and skills, it was really grounding. And yeah, so that's an important perspective for a Southland boy to get.
Before we crack on and talk about the stuff today's guest had to share with us, a big shout out to Rob McDonald and his talented team at Tiwanga Estate over there in Hawke's Bay. Not only do these guys make international gold medal winning wines, they've helped us bring this podcast to your ears. Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Rod. Rod's also sending each of our victims, or my victims, a wine of their choice from his cellar for putting up with me for an hour or so. Thanks, team at Tiwanga, for your superb support. We couldn't do it without you. So today, who's going to strut their stuff on Stuff That Matters Now? I have got an interview that I have wanted to have for many years. Today I talked to Anake Goodall, a profoundly interesting guy, very private, so I feel very privileged to have time with Anake talking about his journey, his time with Ngāi Tahu, which was a monumental part of New Zealand's history. Please listen to this to understand a hell of a lot more about New Zealand's evolution and how we've got to where we are now. So here we are in Oriental Parade, overlooking the ocean, Sunday afternoon in June. Stunning, hoping for a whale to come past. I'm sitting here with Anake Goodall, who some of you will know and many won't know, but hopefully in the next hour or so you'll get to know him a bit more. Anake, thank you for your time Sunday afternoon.
Well, no mai, haere mai, tō mai. Welcome, Harv, to our place, and privilege. Thank you for the opportunity to sit down with you and explore where this conversation might go.
Pleasure. So, Anake, this is the podcast series around Stuff That Matters. You were one of the first people that came to top of mind when I was putting a list together, because you've done lots of stuff in the past that matters, and you're still doing stuff that matters now. So you were one of the first on the list.
Well, I appreciate the thought. I think the definition of the word matters is an interesting question, but guilty over a long period of time of attempting stuff. Yep.
Right. Yes. Okay. The whole purpose of this is that the world is changing, and it's changing a bit quicker than some would like. It appears we don't have time to ponder a lot of stuff that we perhaps thought we had before, which is kind of cool, but freaking a lot of people out as well.
Agreed.
What I would like to do, though, is to go back and so the listeners can get a better idea of who you are, where you've come from, and brushing on some of the stuff that you've done in the past. I remember when I first was introduced to you. Do you remember how that happened?
I remember a conversation with you in C1 in Christchurch. That I forget what the introduction though.
The introduction was you were trying to become part of our bloody closed LinkedIn group. Cheeky bugger came from nowhere and said, I want to join. I said, bugger off, I don't know you.
Look at that. Exclusive club you're running.
And do you know what do you remember what your reaction was?
I don't.
Nobody says no to me. Let's have a coffee. I thought, cheeky bugger.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. That's great.
And look at that. Look at here we are.
Here we are.
Years later.
So, Anake, you're a Dunedin boy.
Born in Dunedin, yes.
Yep. So let's start there and those first few years.
Right. Well, born in Dunedin, only child to a father who's gay, and he and mother split up when I was about 2. He went to the US, and a cancer researcher, very interesting chap and all sorts of things. Maybe we circle back to this. Mother also intellectually inclined, a school teacher by profession, and we shifted to Invercargill when they separated. So I actually grew up in the far south, in conservative Scottish Southland.
Yes.
In a single-parent household. And the prognosis when I was born is that I wouldn't walk, so I've got this interesting congenital condition. So, and a couple of young professors said, well, we've got a theory that if we could try this and we could try that, it would be unique as far as we know. And my father's also medically trained, so they agreed a plan of attack and did various operations. So I'm a medical experiment, and I've got the great fortune of being a successful one. So I've had almost 60 years of mobility versus a life of not walking. So that's really interesting. And there's no doubt that this stuff is formative, right? These challenges are real pains and really stressful in their various ways at the time, and there's all sorts of issues around that we could circle around as well. But you do, in this case, there's a real determination that comes out of that space for me, a bloody mindedness, and that has served me well. And of course, like all things that serve you well, it can be getting your road big time as well. So it was pretty interesting, legs and plaster operations, all of that sort of stuff, a lot of taunting by kids, so that's pretty cruel, didn't enjoy that much. Always been a bit precocious, as you might have mentioned already. Was in the spelling class 2 years ahead of my peers and those sorts of things, so a bit of a loner, a lone wolf, learned to be a lone wolf, because you can't really trust, father, well, he's not there, so he left, and mother is an alcoholic, and she wasn't really emotionally available either. So there's a lonely little boy in the story, and there's a real independence that, humans are remarkable, right? Doesn't matter what circumstances you throw at us, we just work out, even at a really young age, how you get through all this. But these become character traits, and they really become, it seems to me, they write the script or the code for how we then deal with the things that come up. So all that stuff's pretty formative to my trajectory. All my friends went to university.
So, Anake, just going back, when did you sort of start figuring out that you were different?
What a great question. Look, I think I've always been different. Is it the full leg plaster cast that you're carrying around, or the fact that you can't run, or you don't walk the same as other people, so you can't do those physical things the same way? Again, the only child, a little bit, always been curious in the sense of what's this and what's that, and go off in my own direction a little bit. So, and again, that loner thing, and self-reliant. So therefore, it's always nice to have people you're close to and friends and so on, but this is dangerous, but I did learn just to be an island. Right. Raise the drawbridge, and if you're there for me and we're having good human contact, that's great, but I always manage myself that I don't need you, and if you're not there, well, I'm used to that as well. So, right. So I'd never bet on having people there in particular. Apart from, I've got two large characters in my life who are my grandmothers on both sides, and they were just my champions in every sense of the word.
Right.
And I sort of glowed just thinking of them. I was a really anxious young lad, used to wet my pants until quite a late age, so this is a symptom of that. But all that stuff would stop when I was with my grandparents, and my grandmothers in particular. So I've certainly known love and affection and closeness and protectors and so on.
Right, so you knew it existed.
And knew what it looked like and so on, just learnt the tools to be a sole trader and not have to rely on anybody for anything.
Interesting.
So there's always been a distance about me, right? Because and it's that's just managing risk. It seems to me.
Yeah.
It's a young boy managing risk, and so I'll keep a space.
Yeah, it was interesting for me. It was because I was born with hearing loss. My distance was humour. You know, going through school to keep people away or to try and destabilise people, because often I had no idea what was going on. And so I thought, well, I need to take control of this and destabilise the situation so that I now know what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. And I'd use that as it was quite aggressive sometimes. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes it wasn't. But that was my protection thing, going, I don't know what's going on here. Right?
Nice.
But I know that I'm not keeping up here, so I need to take control.
So about to say, it puts you back in control in a way, doesn't it? You're calling those shots at least.
Yeah. And it's great until you overuse it and then it all turns to shit. You know, that was sort of, yeah. So you were going to say about going...
Well, so look, I got my way, I just skipped a whole lot of stuff here, but I got my way through school years, plus and minus, operations on the way through. High school was pretty interesting. I started drinking at like age 14. We were buying 18-gallon kegs and drinking ourselves legless in the fourth and fifth form, no less.
By yourself or with mates?
I know with mates, and there was a bunch of us. We were actually really...
An Invercargill.
Abusers of alcohol,
right.
In the best southern Kiwi tradition, which is just awful, right? Drive when we were legless. And, those sorts of things, of which I'm not proud. This is not an advertisement for any of that stuff. It's suicidal behaviour in its own form, really out of control. Survived that and scraped through academically up to a point. But all my friends went to university to study stuff, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I went to the freezing works, and it was marvellous. I consider it my first professional career, really. To go and be a labourer with real diverse mixture of people, Ngāpuhi lads from way up north who were deeply Māori, to people who were professional electricians who did this in the off-season to get extra good money and set up their business for the rest of the year. It was a real diverse bunch, fascinating issues, classic David and Goliath sort of struggles of the day. It was all those archetypes, management, the owners of capital on one hand, and those who owned labour on the other, and the great struggles between the two. And so I became a union delegate.
What year is this? What?
I went there, it was Australia School, so 75, 76, I suppose.
Right.
So it's a wee while back now. And yeah, so look, I've always had this inclination to be involved in things, or perhaps it's been cursed with having an idea about some ideas that might be possible or that could be different, and therefore an instinct to go there and to search that out. So in the freezing works environment, a few of us started a credit union, right? So I'm at age 17 or something, I'm a founding director of a bank. In community in the labour union. So we started the Makareva Credit Union, and now you and I could take some savings of our pay, and you could borrow the money to buy your next car, excuse me, or and avoid the sort of usurious interest rates of the institutions at the time. So this idea of collectives of people, what's a collective agony or angst or aspiration? Can you articulate it, which is a bit of a thing in itself? Can we agree what's needed here? And then can we mobilise ourselves around that? So you make it real. What would that take? Which means a few hardy souls who are up for these adventurous ideas, and then you've got to build the thing out and make it real. So that seems to be a that instinct's a repeating tape in my story, really. So we started a credit union. We went and bought a dairy farm. So it's quite challenging, really. So this is labourers, right? Who the prototype is beer drinking, no hopers, work for 6 months, steal whatever you can, etc., etc.
And piss it against the wall.
And piss against the wall
Yep.
at the Green Roofs and at the White House down south. And now we're aggregating our capital. We're going into the market and we're buying rural real estate and share milking on it. So this is quite interesting in the 70s. We lobbied, I was involved in this, and won. The Southland Frozen Meat was listed on the share market. So we argued for and won the opportunity for me to make a deduction from my pay every week to buy shares in the company. So now I'm an owner of capital in the organisation that's employing me. So this is really radical for the two sides that are normally spitting at each other. This led to neither side trusting me, really.
Right.
So my union mates would say, "What the hell are you up to, mate? We don't know what you're doing.
You should be fighting these people.
We don't know what you're doing, but you're talking with them and you're doing things and sharing the benefit of things that we've done that makes." Because my thesis was, we'll go and save you the company money, and then you, the company, should share half of that with us. We will be better off. We're incentivised to go and work out what else we can do to improve this
And you're
operation.
17, 18.
And so I was there till about age 20, I think.
Right.
And so, of course, the workers say, "What are you doing here? You're colluding with the enemy." But the management were just the same. This is the remarkable thing to me, is how both sides were really entrenched in their view that the other person was the enemy. This is all about the struggle and doing each other over. And I was trying to sell a proposition that we were two halves of the same coin, and if either of us weren't there, then this whole thing fell over and everyone lost. I couldn't pull that off. It was too radical an idea, and it just wasn't the way the the environment worked. I left sort of age 20, I think. It was a really interesting lesson. I wouldn't say I did it easily, but you can be sort of right in your head or have a view about how things could be different or better, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen, and it doesn't mean you can pull it off. And sometimes you've just got to say, you could say the situation's beaten me, but this just isn't the right time for this or place for this proposition, and I can keep throwing myself against this wall, or you can back out. And so, as I say, we didn't find it easy, and I haven't found these big shifts in my life easy at all, but there's lessons or learnings in them. And look, say with no joy at all, in about 5 years' time, if that, the chains, those gates were chained, that plant was closed, tens of millions of dollars of assets started to rot into the ground, 1,200 people no longer had jobs and their families and all the community benefits of that. So that old industrial model was flawed, it didn't have a future, and in that context, that's exactly where it led. So,
and at that time, they would have been killing millions of subsidised lamb and so forth as well.
Great point. You did right. So the SMPs were running fertiliser subsidies.
70 million sheep in New Zealand. Southland was the capital of the sheep industry of the world.
Remarkable. You're quite right. It had been run on all sorts of country that they shouldn't have in an environmental sense. So the whole thing, it's a very good point. The whole thing was really a house of cards, lots of ways. And not a bad metaphor for the way society rolls, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, look, and I mean, we haven't got time to get into politics. However, it is fascinating. We do. It is it's fascinating that farmers align themselves with the national government, or supposedly, and yet along came Longy, and yes, it was Rogernomics, who was, as it turns out, incredibly right wing, but. And pulled all the subsidies away, and it was just, they just hated Longy, at that stage. But God, it was the best thing that ever happened to farmers.
I think that's a very good metaphor for your opening statement about where we're at. I think the world's changing really fast, and you can fight it and put your head in the sand and resist it, or we can just say, look, we're going to the future anyway, whether we like it or not. Why don't we do it as far as we can on our terms? versus just leave it so long that the thing's so brittle that you need a 1984 revolution which just tipped everybody everywhere out of there.
Yeah, and it wasn't fair. You know, we marched on. I was farming then. We marched on Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like it was the most daft thing to do, because I don't know what we really thought we were marching for. But somebody had shifted our cheese and it wasn't fair.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was the underlying factor. And the townies didn't understand, you know, that us good people had been bloody wrecked by the Labour government. Right? We didn't think it was Muldoon who'd given them the subsidies in the first place. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was fascinating. Fascinating.
And look, at the same time, think of all those industries that in Christchurch and other places that just closed down, right? Alex Harvey Glass, there's just these big employers and manufacturers that have been set up by these crazy artificial market mechanisms, and just literally just go to work and find that the factory's closed.
Yeah.
So enormous disruption right across the economy, and really brutal. I think the thing that's most offensive to me about all of that period is the lack of transition, the lack of intelligence.
Yes.
In the language of today, the just transition. And so I think really interesting to ponder that lesson and think about what's the just transition today, whether we're talking about the rural sector or the manufacturing sector, because there are big changes afoot. I think there's no doubt about that. And we get the same choice, right? We can deny, do nothing, obfuscate, use inertia, and then bang, we're going to have a seismic shift that'll be really disruptive. Or we can say, oh, bugger it, we're going there, this is going to be uncomfortable, but let's drive it as much as we can and have a smoother, a more just, more intelligent transition. So I think, yeah, it's a pretty good metaphor for where we're at, really, or analogy.
Yeah, and look, it was similar to the conversation with Rich Alderton the other day about the struggles of corporates and companies and so forth to change, and just the sheer fear of the unknown, you know, stops people progressing. And it's interesting at the moment with the conversation that James Cameron is having was on the Sunday program a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yep.
And people are up in arms about not producing meat and so forth, right? I said, well, hang on. He's actually talking about the end of democracy. That's his real driver, is going, we have got to, you know, find different ways of doing this.
Yep.
And so ultimately he wants the same as the farmers, that he wants to have a world that's just and people have, you know, have a say and so forth. The way he's expressing it is confronting to a lot of people, but it needs engagement rather than just going, oh, he's a nutty bloody filmmaker, what would he know? And actually step into the conversation, and rather than just batter it down.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. No one should be surprised at the idea that there's going to be less meat in the future. This is not news to people who have been paying attention. Now, this isn't a criticism. I know that we're all busy and we don't all pay attention to everything all the time, because no one can. But this trend has been writ large for quite some time. It's accelerating. So all James is doing is articulating what is a phenomenon. And so it's actually a service. It might be uncomfortable, but of course change, back to your earlier point, change makers must always cause discomfort, because otherwise they're not causing change. Otherwise it's just the status quo, and we'll all remain comfortable and we'll do nothing differently. So the nature of the beast, if you're going to change a narrative and a worldview, is to introduce discomfort. So yeah, I think it's but the the messenger always gets shot at, right?
Yep. He's being shot at.
That's the job.
He's being shot at. So coming back to 20 years of age, finishing at the freezing works.
So I went and lived in a tent in northern Southland, right? Father had a little block of land up there, very scruffy, very poor pine trees on it. Sort of the romantic, idealistic, well, just type full stop. But it's really interested in just trying to work out what that might be, what it could be. It's an awful climate. This is just dumb, right? You go to Northland.
You survive.
This is my advice.
Yeah.
I spent the whole year in a tent. I used to wake up in the winter and scrape the ice off the inside of it. No power. It's look, in some ways, the happiest period of my life, in the sense of it's just an opportunity to be with yourself, think about where I want to go in the world, what matters. It's really formative for me, because I got interested in the environments, Bill Mollison and permaculture. All those ideas were starting to come through. Started to read about Findhorn in Scotland and biodynamic farming. I mean, that's really bloody weird shit back in 1980.
Yeah, you could be locked up for having those conversations.
Really bizarre.
Yeah.
I was interested in the theory of normal. Was it the National Organisation for the Reform of Marijuana Laws? It was firing up in the US back in the time, and just curious about the debate around all of that. And look, here we are 40 years later settling that now. It seems to me all those issues are coming home for resolution. So I got rid of this environment, started a plant nursery, knew nothing about plants and nothing about business. So I've made every mistake in the book and a few about all of that, but got really quite intrigued by circular. Today we call it circular economy or circular ecosystem. So how about we plant a tree, which is a shout about, which protects the lambing ewes from the cold southerly. That if you prune some of them, you might get a high value log off the bottom. You might get a fruit crop from some of them. You might house the birds that come and eat the grass grubs, so you don't need DDT. And you just think about ways in which you might start to create environment, natural means. And that's been formative and stayed with me ever since, really. And I built up a small nursery, but produced a lot of trees of all sorts of types, veggie plants and rhododendrons and shout-abouts. And
Whereabouts was this?
in Mossburn.
Right. I've been to Mossburn in the middle of winter. It's a rugged place.
My grandfather bought land there back in the whenever. I'd have to think hard about when that was. The quip at the time was he bought it by the gallon, not the acre.
Right.
It was completely virgin tussock country. With
right.
Tussocks were as tall as the tractor and really rugged. It's tough country and beautiful as well. And guess what? 1984 came along to go back to that theme. Yep. The subsidies removed. All the farmers go, God, our world's just tipped upside down.
Yeah, they're not spending money on anything.
We're not spending money on anything.
Yep.
So that's my very modest and sub-sustainable operation. Couldn't work in that environment. And it just happened at the same time that what's now the Waitangi Tribunal process was starting to fire up. The legislation was passed, it must have been 1985, to change the Treaty of Waitangi Act to allow retrospective claims to be heard by the Tribunal. And my father hung up his scientist coat in Dunedin, so he'd been to the States, came home with a black boyfriend in like 1967, so it's a reasonably radical act, actually. Took him to Dunedin, right? So
fairly inconspicuous.
So props. I mean, this is just ballsy. It's courage. So he'd been he set up the Hugh Adam Cancer Research Unit down in Otago, and so white coats. You go up to visit him once or twice a year, maybe, and he's dissecting rats for tumours and so on. He hung up his white coat and became effectively the first director of the Waitangi Tribunal. So a whole lot of said what just happened here. And so he came up to Wellington, bought this apartment that we're sitting in now, and just threw himself into service to this idea of reconciliation of Indigenous interests and rights through these proper mechanisms. So he rang me one day. I'm in a little house in Mossburn by this stage. I was renting off a friend, and he rang me one day and said, "Well, boy, I've never troubled you with any of this, but somewhere we've got an association with things Ngāi Tahu. And the Naito claim is going to be, their first hearing of the Naito claim is going to be on this date in the near future. And I think you should go there." And it's my one request on this front.
Just out of the blue.
Go to Christchurch and go to this thing. So the distant father's voice has got enormous power, right? So this guy's, I don't really know him particularly well at all. He's been remote. Where did he go? Why did he go? This guy's way bigger than life. So all these signals were heard very clearly, and I hopped in my car, and a little white boy drives out of Southland and comes up to the marae at Tuahiwi it was, the opening ceremony. Don't know anyone, don't know the language, don't understand any of the custom, no idea what the issues are, but I can over there see my father's got some role in all of this. So I sort of got through I'll use the word terror because that's the way I have thought about a lot of these things, and I just listened into the start of the story. And what happened is partly because I could, and partly because I was in what you would describe now as transition. I was leaving the nursery business because the lack of demand and change in interest as well, I think. I went every month to the tribunal shifted locations around the Naito patch on a monthly basis and would hold hearings in different centres. I've had the enormous privilege of hearing the elders of that time in each of their own communities saying, in our area, what happened as a result of these broken land deeds and promises and so on, is this happened and that happened and this happened, and here's our list of grievances and this is the impact. And it really is a precious gift just to have the opportunity to hear all these stories and get this insight into how all these bits of this country's history worked in that context, at least. And so I'd turn up and I would wash dishes, and then I would work on the photocopier, because you'd see these some of the Naito chiefs doing these menial jobs, which is so you think, oh, well, I can do that, I can do that thing. And of course people see that, hey, Mararere's boy's come back, and he's come back again, and he's doing this, and so one thing leads to another, and I get other jobs. And so I literally deconstructed the nursery in Mossburn, sold all the bits off, went to Christchurch, went to university at a tender age of 28 or something. Absolutely terrifying, right? You sit beside 17 and 18-year-old kids with their zitty faces, and the lecturer says, I want an essay on X by then, and they go, oh yeah, righto, and I go, what the hell's an essay? Being me, I bought a book on essay writing.
Right.
Scared the bejesus out of me.
So what was the degree?
It ended up being, it's a licorice all sorts, it ended up being a major in written Māori language, actually.
Right.
My approach was a kid in a lolly shop, right? So what is this institution? I did accounting at 8 a.m. in the morning, God help us, geography, marketing, history, psychology, history I really enjoyed. It taught me how to write, really. Some Māori language stuff, a real potpourri. It could have ended up anywhere as a degree, but I just thought, I don't know anything about that. I wonder what that's about. And it's really interesting that what you find in those places, really formative. And at the same time, I volunteered for what was then the Naito Māori Trust Board, continuing doing photocopying work, and started to get other jobs, write submissions on things. The whole thing was...
And you were good at that?
I wasn't to start with, but you learn. And people like Tipene, Sir Tipene Regan, these guys are very generous. The whole thing's a voluntary exercise, far too much to do. And you say, oh, we need a submission about such and such. I go, okay, I'll have a go at it. Have a go to draft. What's our position? And I'll try and write that up. And he said, well, you're writing the submission, so you're going to be telling me what the position is. So these guys were very generous at saying, here's a job. You go and stretch your wings at it. And again, for the shy, tentative types, this is reasonably stressful to think about it that way. But you focus, take it seriously, have a good go, and really get stretched by it.
Because all the stuff was groundbreaking stuff. Anake, there was no one before you, really, was there?
It was a policy vacuum in a national sense. So we'd had the Tainui settlement. It's the first one that formalised the fiscal envelope policy, as it's referred to, but the policy framework that says we'll have this much money and we'll settle these claims under these conditions, all that was being made up in this vacuum. There's no mandate. Governments didn't know how to do it because it's never been done before. Tribal groups didn't know how to do it because it's never been done before. The tribunal didn't know. It was finding its own feet as well. So it's pretty interesting space in which to operate. Tainui settled very understandably and cleverly, I think, settled their financial loss aspects for a cheque. We'll take the money, $170 million, thank you. And we, Tainui, will put aside all these really complex questions about the Waikato River and harbours and what Indigenous rights might be in the natural environment and how that might be recognised in contemporary times. Naito steps up and says, well, we want to go down this track as well. And the government says, oh, we're refining our policy now, so we're changing the game. This will be a full one settlement, full and final in the language, and everything's in. So every damaged eel fishery, every lost education opportunity, you've got to name them all, and we'll agree whatever we're going to agree. Before you line up. And there's one settlement. So Tainui's had 2 or 3 goes as over time as the policies developed. Naito was the first comprehensive settlement for a tribal group with traditional authority over something like 50+% of New Zealand's landmass, 70% of its fresh water, I think. This is a Herculean task.
Yes.
And we had to think our way through, how would you frame this up? How would you define it? How would you, what redress could you reasonably look to ask for, create in the political environment at the time, given that all the signalling is, here's the money and you're not going to get any more, and you can't have this and you can't have that, and here's all the reasons, things you can't have. A remarkable environment, and I don't want to cut the other side too much slack, but enormous credit for Jim Bolger in particular, who, when asked, why on earth would you do this, Prime Minister? There's no votes in it. It's just got everyone's up in arms about it. And his response was that classic, well, it's the right thing to do, right? So, but he and the Doug Grahams and the Doug kids, the sharp end of this spear, didn't even have their own caucus support to do this stuff. Dare say the National Party support to do this stuff. Dare say the Parliament support. Dare say the nation's support. So this is what I think of as real leadership. You don't see it too often. I think we see it less and less now, the way politics is set up. So these are big statements about who we are, big steps into the hard work, despite the fact there's uncertainty in it. So the whole country was doing some pretty remarkable stuff.
I have a mate from years ago who was a staffer for Bolger, and because Bolger could come across as being quite plain, as a politician, he could be. Mm-hmm. And I said, "What's he like?" And he said, "He has got the sharpest brain. He reads phenomenal amount of stuff, yep. And he's as sharp as a tack." Mm. And that was the first time I'd heard that. He seemed like this country gym type person. Yeah, obviously, he was. And he was. I remember him saying that it was the right thing to do. With the settlements.
He had a moral code, I think, which matters, a sense of justice, and pretty shrewd operator, right? So he, if I'm remembering this correctly, but he had to lead our way into the MMP environment, and
yes.
Put together different coalitions with different players under trying circumstances, and that's real skill, right? To nuance all that, and so the country was lucky to have that sort of leadership on the government
right
side. And we had to do our bit and step in and try and work out how you would build the framework to go forward to settle the issue. But we were very conscious that we weren't just doing Naito's work, because what we did, and this did come to pass, and we'd been stuck with, every time we'd say something, the government negotiators would say, that's not what we do with Tainui. So all Naito ever heard is what Tainui did. And then all the people heard that came after Naito heard, that's not what we did with Naito.
Right.
So you get this, the framework that we were setting up, the scaffolding, had to attempt to accommodate other tribal stories that might want to come through. We don't want to cut anyone else off at the pass, was our approach. I think it was the right one. I think we did not a bad job under the circumstances. And look, these fair freezing worker hands, along with a number of mates, we've written a code which in some places is still used to settle tree settlements today, which it's reasonably a scary responsibility on one hand, but it does make the point that the world's made up of you and me and all the other people out there doing the thing that is in front of us at the time, the best of our ability at the time. And these are incremental, additional contributions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've said it numerous times recently. I said, look, the issues we've got now are not going to be solved by famous people. They're going to be solved by millions of ordinary people making a difference in some way and going, I need to do my bit.
Yep.
And it's not going to be saved by Bono or a few people. It's going to be saved by, I'm not sure if it's billions, but it's certainly hundreds of millions of people going, we need to make a change here or to do something here.
We've all got a piece of this puzzle, this conversation. We've all got things we can do. We've all got agency. We've got influence and myriad different ways. So there was a responsibility that I think we all carry and should own. And, of course, part of the trick is not to be overwhelmed by that and say that's all my individual responsibility to save the world. There's an arrogance and a whole lot of stuff that's dangerous in there as well. But step up with some humility. And
Anake, how big was that Ngāi Tahu team?
It depends how you'd measure it. I was the claims manager. One fateful day.
Claims manager.
Yes.
Ooh, that sounds flash.
It's not bad for a Southland boy. One day, fateful day, I said to Tiffany, I can't see how it's going to work. Because the government's got all this machinery and infinite resources by definition, and we're a committee of volunteers. And so wouldn't these monthly meetings we're having with the government, shouldn't we have an agenda, and shouldn't someone be responsible for that agenda, and shouldn't there be a budget to go with it and some papers produced in the meantime? And he puffed on his pipe and said, I think you're right, you're it. It's an enormous compliment. And you think, well, there's a learning there as well. I had a couple of offsiders in particular, young women, Sandra Cook and Justine Inns, that worked with me, and we bore the brunt of the executive function here. So there's tribal communities around the South Island, and there's a tribal leadership, and there's an executive supporting the management of the tribe, such as it was at that time, far smaller scale, but we were the claims unit. And we used to work all night sometimes. You spend hours on this and we won't. But so the government's got a whole lot of strengths, departments full of people and budgets and stuff up the wazoo, and we had none of that. So, of course, you've got to turn the adversity into advantage. So if there's a policy debate going on, we get a paper from the government officials, we would stay up all night, and when they got back to work the next morning at 8 a.m, in some cases, they would find Naito's response on their fax machine, right? And they would then have to go back into their own huddles and spend 3 weeks trying to work out how to respond to us and reconcile the debate between the departments. And so we just had to think about how we would balance the level the playing field. Small team, worked enormously hard, a real privilege. There's something about this early stage space where there aren't too many people around, but the people who turn up are there for the right reasons, right?
Yep.
Purely mission driven. There's an objective, and put aside the practicalities and the fact there's no money or whatever, this matters and we're all in. And in some ways, despite the fact it's enormously hard by all sorts of dimensions, it's very easy at another level because the motivations are really clear. No one was there for the money because there was none.
Right.
There's no tension about whether I was getting paid more or less than you because neither of us have been paid.
Yep.
All those things fall away. You're either serious about the issues, if you were, you turned up. So it's very, I want to use the word pure. It's a space of pure intention.
Love that quote, adversity into advantage. Yeah. Brilliant quote.
Well, so this thing's obviously just a big flying circus, right? For years, there's the going round, there's the claim, there's the tribunal report, there's the start of negotiations and a void of no framework to do it, then you negotiate your way through it. You're basically negotiating this policy with the public. Royal Forests and Birds have got the minister's ear, and they're trying to make sure this doesn't happen, and you can't have the natives taking this over and the other thing. And we all remember the debates at the time, the Maoris are going to come and take my house, and why are we giving these people anything anyway?
Yep.
And there's all that sort of inherited baggage that colonised countries have. And again, I try not to be critical at a personal level about it. It's just the way these communities roll. It is the colonisation story. Everything before it, before the colonisers are seen through the lens of what they left behind at home. Anything that looks the same they'll recognise, anything that looks differently is invisible, and they'll walk right past. And there's all sorts of incentives to dismantle the rights and legitimacy of the Indigenes and
of the savages,
and have it supplanted. Savages, and in our case, in this country, we had noble savages, so it was done with some nuance and aplomb. But the driver was, and frankly, is still the same. We've got to destroy the Indigenous customary property right interests because they're in the road. They're in the road of what we want to do, and our higher societal ambitions and our economy and the way we work with the privatisation of things, etc., etc. So these are big arm wrestles at that level, and they take a very long time to unpack and surface and cry about, and so that's why everyone likes to fixate on the money. But the Naito settlement might be 1 cent in the dollar, demonstrable financial loss. This actually really offends me, this metric, because it values at zero 6 generations of human loss and suffering, where all those communities were pushed to the margin of society and have ended up owning one day 20 million acres of their own estate, and a couple of short decades later, literally starving to death on rocky outcrops in the land that the settler society didn't want. All of that and the subsequent damage, which is going to take a long generations to repair, is valued at zero by these comparisons. So this whole game, you can't describe it as being just or fair or reasonable or anything else particular. It's what's plausible, politically feasible in the day, in the politics of a country at a point in time. But the big prize, in my view, is that it's an opportunity for these communities to start to self-determine again. They can make their own decisions about what to do next without going to the minister for permission. Or it's a long road back, but I think, in my view, personal view, is that this whole thing was a bet on if we could get some resources back into the tribal group's own hands and the authority for them to use those resources the way that they chose to, then you've got to bet on yourself, right? Naito had to bet on itself that we'll take this 1 cent in the dollar and just leave us alone. We'll have a go at this. And so some tribal groups have had some stumbles. They get criticised by everybody for it. What are they guilty of? They're guilty of having a go with their own money and making a mistake after 6 generations have been. Yeah, it's no great.
Interesting though, because when on the whole, it looks like the iwis have done really well, but when they do stumble, you hear people go, "Oh, those bloody Maoris with our money. I knew they wouldn't, do the right thing and all that sort of carry on." And you look at it, and it's just a very small segment have stumbled. Most of them have done really well.
And this is totally improper language, but if you think of, you think of your kids and as they're getting to familiar with money, well, you give them a bit and they lose it. And the important thing is to get their own check account, right? And get out there and do some stuff. That's how we learn about these things. Yep. So these communities are relearning how to use serious scale capital after some generations have been out of practice. So I think they're doing remarkably well, and this country ain't seen nothing yet, in my opinion, as these groups settle down and get their own institutions up and running and reclaim the sort of courage of their convictions about the cultural frame and start to bring billions of dollars to bear on a new way of thinking about these things. I think they could be real leaders in the transition.
Anake, how long were you involved with that Ngāi Tahu process?
We settled, the Naito settlement was 98. I was burnt out about twice over, went to Harvard for a year, did a public administration master's. Really good from my perspective after some really intense time in the settlement space. Came back to a couple of years in Wellington and went back to Ngāi Tahu to try and contribute to some economic development work, but the institution was suffering real growing pains by then. It had grown enough and it was collapsing under its own weight a little bit, and some of the whole thing's a theory, right? It's literally written on a napkin, and then you try and give effect to it, and some of the original design principles weren't complete and so on, so there were big challenges, political division, split parliament and so on, and ended up being chief executive, which is reasonably unlikely.
It's a proper job.
I would have thought. Yeah, well, yes, it was a big job. Again, a small handful of really committed team members who could see the challenges and the things we needed to do and worked enormously hard. And we managed to fix a number of, I just consider the early stage faults in the original constitutional arrangements and so on. And I think assets under management at that stage were earning a lazy, let's say 4%, the commercial assets, and they should be somewhere about 10% plus now, as they should be, I think, for a charitable institution. But the compound value of improved financial returns on a corpus like that over a perpetual organisation is enormous, right? That fix has already added more money than the original settlement. Did that for maybe 4 years, got these things fixed, and worked out a bit of, shall I say, calm weather, at which point I was able to exit and transition out. I don't know that I've told too many people this, but when I first got that role, I dry retched every morning for 6 months, right? It just so... I was terrified, really, of the role, the responsibility, the challenge, the big ask, things I didn't particularly understand. There was some big issues to be sorted and some scraps to be had and things to be done. And, so the word terror does come back to mind. But
and what was the greatest terror? What was the greatest terror of that phase?
Look, I'm a curious chap, but more ways than one probably, but it just felt like a sacred responsibility. I knew what had been given up to get this bit of money, right? Because I'd heard all the stories from the old people. I knew that we were getting this very, shall we be polite, modest cent in the dollar, and this was the one chance. So I knew what had gone into it, and I knew the aspirations of the people that had sacrificed a lot of things to get to that point. And to see the money being used a little bit irresponsibly or loosely, or it wasn't a good match with the backstory. And so there's a double burden in these institutions. That one is to those who've gone before, right? So you can look at all their photos on the wall when you walk into your office every morning. I had a particular selection of aunties that I used to say good morning to in the morning and say good night to as I walked out. You think, am I doing today what honours their legacy? But then you can have a facing imaginary wall, which is all the generation to come. Is what we're doing consistent with the past, as far as it's possible to do so, and honouring those yet to come and their entitlement or their rights in this space? It's pretty weighty space, really, right? You're not going to the corner shop to sell bread for the day. And this is, and the decisions when you magnify them over generations are really substantial. Billions of dollars for some simple decisions if you sort of think about the financial lens. But if you think about educational profile and where that leads over 2 or 3 generations, to take one aspect. Well, what about health statistics and well-being and everything which you can fix, telescoped in the long run, is a really significant gain for that population, and therefore the rest of the community that interacts with that population.
I'd imagine some of the tribe were not overly happy about the settlement of 1%.
And quite rightly so. I was able to stand up in front of, I remember some of the big mandating meetings at the end, 500-700 people in the room, and you'd stand up in the back of the room and you'd say, "You'd be kidding me, you want me to eat this up? This is just offensive, where would I start?" And you have to say, well, you're right, Harv. This is offensive at every turn.
Yep.
So here's your choice, right? You can do nothing. You can stay pissed about it. You can complain. 6 generations of your people have already. Why don't you just keep the grievance alive and stoke that flame and give it to your kids? That's already cost a generation of time. You tell me why New Zealand society is going to give you more in 1 generation's time. And I don't think that that's very plausible, actually. What's the opportunity cost here is enormous, again. You think about that. I really rate Sir Tepani and the leadership who said, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know whether things will get better, and we're going to give up that opportunity. We don't know that we're going to take this money and be successful with it. And if any of those things come to pass, then future generations will be able to criticise us in the everlasting tribal memory and say you were wrong. You buggers cocked this up and we've been screwed ever since and there's no way out of it, and we've got your name and we know your family members. But equally, potentially this could be take us somewhere better, and if we're up for backing ourselves. And so that leadership who said, despite all of that, we are recommending that we step into this space and do our best at carving this out in our own terms. And So we now know, of course, by some of these measures that I think we were right. Would the government, would the good people of New Zealand have given Ngāi Tahu today $1.5 billion to settle the claim when they'd only do that 170 million 20 years ago? The answer is no. The market is not 10 times as generous as it was, but Ngāi Tahu has that capital now, earned off its own sweat and its own mistakes and so on.
And it's got some skill and it's got some experience.
It's learned a lot of stuff on the way through, which is the real winning in a way. And there's a whole generation. I was really struck with how quickly this happened. That previous generations have had the burden of keeping this thing alive, right? And you've got to keep the papers, and you've got to keep the argument, and so-and-so told me, and Granddad did this, and because you're always carrying the file ready to prosecute the case when you get the opportunity. One of the big prizes here is future generations have been allowed to put all that down and to watch the cultural resurgence but it's actually psychological resurgence. The rangatahi with their head up and their shoulders back and they're proud of who they are and they know where they come from and they're investing all of the energy that was previously in fight mode into building their own households and communities, and the handbrake's off, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? Most New Zealanders, many New Zealanders still don't see how positive the iwis are, just what they're doing. You know, it's one of the privileges of my job is I get a chance to see up close some of the stuff that's going on. You go, man, this is sensational.
Just the tip of the iceberg, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. So after finishing so you went to Harvard, did a stint there?
Public administration, philanthropy, really interested in that and economic development in particular, because it seemed to me that you can argue that a tribal authority by some measures is like a multi-generational foundation, right? It's got capital, which is mission, it's mission aligned or intentional capital with a value set that's managed over the long run for the financial surplus, which is used to bring about a certain conditional change. That's not a bad definition of a foundation. And I was just really curious about how we might inform the emerging tribal renaissance space by these disciplines that have been. America's got a very deep foundation history, but this is just really hard. What do you do with a distributable dollar if you're a Naito or a Tainui or whatever? Where does it go? Do you buy an education grant? Do you try and fix the environment? Do you try and improve social cohesion? It's these things are mini nation states. So it was a wonderful. Harvard was a wonderful opportunity to be a long way away from all this stuff.
Yep.
To the other side of the world, really needed that. An opportunity to play with these ideas, which are very real, and just try and think, run thought experiments about what might inform what we could do back here. And something that you'd love that space, because you realise you're in a room and you think, God, I'm at Harvard, and imposter syndrome, right? I'm the Friesenberger himself. How the hell did I get in? And you realise that the person on the side of me was literally the advisor to the President of the United States on nuclear arms policy, and this one was the former Minister of the Economy for the Ukraine or something. And I wouldn't have lent that guy $10. And you realise that we're all it, right? You know, we are the people we're waiting for. That wonderful phrase. The world is run. One way or another, at all levels, by you and me.
Yeah.
So with all our foibles and flaws and fears, and our positive attributes and intentions and skills, it was really grounding. So that's an important perspective for a Southland boy to get.
It's funny, we see that in a number of times in collective intelligence teams. People go, I don't think I'm bright enough or I'm worthy to be there or whatever, right? And just go, get over yourself. You know, it's fascinating to see that that's alive and well for lots of people. And sometimes some of the best people, hold on to that belief.
there's something in that, but your earlier observation about the famous and so on. I'm not against fame, but a lot of real work's done by us. We're doing the job, and we should celebrate that, really.
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think support. We do need. Being a loner is not a recipe for success in this space. We've got to work out how to be vulnerable and say to friends, we need a hand here, or I just don't understand that, or do think ultimately we've got to work out how do we find each other. All of these things, had the privilege been involved in some interesting projects, those that I think have got some potential to have been meaningful are all because we somehow worked out how to create complementary sets of people to do things together. None of these things could have been done by one individual. Big contributions from some individuals, but they could never have been realised if you didn't have the complementary bits, the follow-up guy, or the money person, or the marketing lady, or so we need each other.
Yep.
To do this.
So, Anake, after that stint with as CEO of Ngāi Tahu, you could have put your hand up for all sorts of CEO roles at that stage, possibly.
I suppose, yeah.
Instead, you did what?
Well, I had friends who said, well, you're CEO now, mate, and you've got this budget and you've got that senior staff working for you. So obviously you're now scanning the market for the position that's got twice as many staff and twice the budget. And I actually did exactly the opposite. I resigned my position and stepped into no job with no idea. And look, it's possibly the cleverest thing I've ever done, which is to do nothing. It's quite...
back to Mossman into the tent?
Not quite that far back. My darling wife probably have a view on that. It's quite counterintuitive for me, who's got an anxious disposition, to just say, well, I don't know where this is going, but I'm just going to go into the void, as it were, and see what happens. But out of that space, sort of opportunities come if you can keep your hands off it and not try and predetermine it. And look, it seemed like no time at all. I found myself on a director of Meridian Energy, of which I'm enormously proud. It's a wonderful company, wonderful people all the way through. It's a wonderful insight into the country at a big and important level and important dimension. And I might be about then that Anna Gunther very generously invited me to join her Pledge Me board, and I had a number of roles like that. Nick Smith rang up and said, I'm trying to get a thing called the Environmental Protection Authority going. I'm looking for someone who understands the Maori dimension, but isn't too nervous about the fact that commerce or economy is involved as well, and might be able to bridge that gap. And so these are real privileges, right, to all of them, and similar things, the Hillary Institute work. So that worked because I didn't go and look for it, which is really curious, and so I wouldn't pretend it's the way I normally operate. And I don't know, there's a bit of me really interested in life as an experiment, right? So what's that thing over there?
Right.
What's Harv trying to do?
Right.
Do I understand it? Can we have a cup of coffee and we'll just try and get ahead into that? Oh, you're trying to dig a ditch from there to there. Look, I've got a shovel in the back of my car and I've got a spare day. Can I give you a hand? And sometimes that just means that you get a ditch take a bit faster. But every now and then you find a connection. You think, oh, I see what look, we could do more of this. And
yes,
it's really interesting how, in my case, against the odds, making the opportunity just to connect with people and try a little bit of, I'll call it random, but just follow that instinct that I'm often shy about leaning into. Some of these lead into really interesting journeys with cool people really attempting to do stuff that matters, and you find a way that you can contribute for a period of time, and then the job's done, or the bit that I might have something to contribute to is done. And then I think part of the trick is to be aware of that and say, Ian, it's been great working with you, mate, but you're doing something different now. And
actually, it's something I've noticed with you. You are very good at putting things down.
I think it's an art. I'm not sure about. I'm very conscious of exiting, I think, as important as entering. It intrigues me that a lot of people put a lot of work into getting the position on the board or whatever, and then assume that I'm there for 3 terms. Or I left the EPA early. I went and saw the chair and said, look, I'm a builder, I'm an early stage guy. We've done that bit. We've done a cycle or 2. And there's Kerry Prendergast. I really enjoyed working with her. And but now the thing's up and going, I think you're not getting good value from me. It doesn't inspire me the way that the building bit does. And so just when you're ready, I would like to vacate my chair. I think that's the best contribution that you can make at a certain point in time. So I think leaving's is as important as
and doing the leaving with some skill, and humility and all that sort of stuff.
It's a big job, transition, and particularly on boards where you might have gone from A to B, but the challenge at B is quite different. So you need new skill sets, you need a conversation around that, and yes, it's important. It's really interesting just to debate these things. I think the smooth, constructive transition is part of the responsibility of the job, and if you're not up for that, you shouldn't take it. In the same way as you want to be chief executive, fine. Job number 1 is, I think, how are you building your replacement, and how are you conducting yourself so that the transition is smooth and constructive for everybody. And I think the director governance role responsibility is the same.
So going back to Ngāi Tahu, Anake, if you look at it today, I'm sure you don't agree with everything they're doing, but do you feel a sense of pride as to where they've got to now?
Well, I look at it's a fabulous story, a whole lot of measures, and we know the before and we know the after, and opportunity, right? There's options on the table. That community could do effectively anything they want to at this point in time. That's one hell of a prize. You think about mana motuhake, self-determination, the capacity to chart your own course for a tribal group that basically had no options, no money, no choices, no influence, no say, trying to carry itself with just about no resource to where we've got to, where they've got to is, I think it's wonderful in all sorts of ways, and just a real privilege to be invited in, to be given roles that were significant, ability to contribute, the people I've worked with. Wow, and some of it was hair-raisingly hard, personally challenging. What the hell have I got to offer to this, and how do I solve this problem? And that person's been rather nasty here, and what do I do about that? And, that old saying, you learn a lot about yourself when you're under fire, right? And you do get a sense of what we can do, and with any luck you get a sense of what we shouldn't be doing, and I need to find you to do that bit because I just don't have those skills. So it's I just the recipient. I'm the recipient of a lot of generosity, and I know a lot of people, my darling wife included, is very active in this community. You see the things they're doing with the generation that's coming through, and it's a wonderful contribution to the fabric of New Zealand.
So, Anake, let's just shift the conversation to the Edmund Hillary Fellowship Foundation.
So the Hillary Institute of International Leadership is
it's close.
I call the mothership. So that's the founding institutional idea. Probably 12 years old. Founding director Mark Prain, dear friend based in Christchurch. We've been mates for 30 years. Had a few campaigns together. He effectively had this idea of how might we celebrate that Sir Ed spirit of contribution, in my words. And a bunch of us got together and formed the Institute. We find one laureate a year globally who's doing shit that matters. Individuals are really turning a dial at a global scale. And in a way, that's the simple recipe. Find the person, let's call them Ian Harvey, working saving the Amazon rainforest from Chevron's depredations for oil extraction and so on. and damage those Indigenous communities, tap you on the shoulder and say, mate, we want to invite you to be the Hillary Laureate for the year. And this is quite empowering for people in the trenches. People in the trenches for quite some time and might be a bit tired and thinking, oh, this is going nowhere and I'm going to leave. And we all know how tough that is. So we're just saying, hey, we see you, right? And they can say to their supporters or potential supporters, oh, look, this international foundation called the Hillary Institute, we've got the badge of approval, and all of a sudden, rather than them trying to ring funders, they've got the funders ringing them, so that it's sort of material benefit that way as well. And we get to profile exactly this profile. People, we call it mid-career, but doing stuff. It's not, I split the atom 20 years ago, here's my Nobel Prize. It's, I'm attempting to split the atom. Yeah. And if we could pull that off, then some good things. So a bit to your vibe. We're looking for people in the trenches doing work. 12 years old, we've got 9 laureates. Every fourth year we give a $100,000 New Zealand prize, or have done to date, which laureates, the previous laureates can bid for. And that's led to some really interesting programs that they run with effect. And then off the back of that, 4 years ago, we've got the Edmund Hillary Fellowship up and going. So this is with our good friends Brian and Matthew Monaghan and Joseph Ayele. Joseph's the chief executive of this thing. It's, if you will, trading with the Hillary brand. It's owned, actually, technically. It's a 100% subsidiary of the Institute. The Institute's a charity, a charitable entity. The fellowships are held in a company with a contract to the New Zealand government. The government has made available as a pilot an impact visa. I think this is a global first. So it's the opportunity for someone from overseas to come to this country and work on stuff that matters here, and if successful, then take that back onto the global stage to help affect change of the sort that the world needs with increasing urgency. And it does give some prime positioning in the process to apply for residency as well, to which we've woven 20% of the cohort of Kiwis, right? So now New Zealanders get the opportunity to hang with these international live wires, a very inspiring group, real mixture. Some people have got money from exiting successful businesses, some are young and just getting into the space. So it's a real mashup of ideas and thinking in sectors. And this idea is 3-4 years young. We're just about to announce our 5th cohort, and I think that'll get us to about 200 fellows in aggregate. That means there's 40-50 Kiwis in there. And these guys are starting to, there's now enough critical mass that there's groups in Christchurch that are sort of self-forming and starting to find their own rhythm.
So they come, you'll bring them to New Zealand?
So it's an invitation to come to New Zealand. They've got the visa, they've got the authority to come here. Some people stay based in, so it's New York or Singapore or wherever they are, and come here across the year to do business and to connect. And others simply bring their family and just shift it to New Zealand, bang. So there's various approaches to how the fellowship's used by the fellows. And I think the really interesting thing is what happens next, right? So attracting and selecting change makers is really hard. There's a lot of discipline, enormous respect for the team that does all this work. But if it's going to do anything, the question is, how do the fellows find each other? All the regenerative agriculture guys, how do they find each other? How do the blockchain guys, the space guys, the verticals that are emerging here, how do they find each other, and how do we do something with that? And do something with that as a country. And people like me go right back to mission. You think of Sared himself. The framing that I like is how do we make this part of New Zealand's contribution to the global issues of the day, right? What's the contribution we can take out as the small country that can, because small countries have advantages. So I think that's the question, and that's the work, is to work out how to arrange these things so we can offer something.
It's. I heard recently somebody say it doesn't really matter what New Zealand does, we're so small, and it was a comment around climate change or something.
Yep.
But we're also incredibly influential. I think, Anake, people, because we can do things more easily than others, I think a lot of countries look to us to see what we're doing.
An idea we're very clear of with the Hillary Institute at the get-go is you can just think of the Scandinavian country from the south, right? Why wouldn't New Zealand aspire to be, or actually already be, a Norway or a Sweden, so we're economically and militarily irrelevant. We can't hurt anybody. We're genuinely independent. We're progressive, and you can think of women's suffrage and so on, the nuclear weapons policy. And I agree with you. We know, for example, that our work in Antarctica as a country, a lot of other big countries look to see what the New Zealand lead is, right? Well, what's New Zealand recommending on this? And we're going to follow that, or we're going to take that very seriously and be inclined to follow that. And it is interesting, a little bit frustrating, when people, including some previous ministers in the climate change space, say, we're nothing,
yes.
Nothing, and therefore we've got nothing to contribute. There's a wonderful cartoon that I must have in my file somewhere of, can you imagine New Zealand playing rugby that way?
Yes.
Oh, well, who are we? Look, don't pass me the ball in, because all these other guys will chase me.
How could we beat America?
That's all a bit scary. And so it's just interesting to look at the disconnect. And you think of a reframing, we are the All Blacks across all issues. Now, wouldn't that be an interesting way to approach climate change and regenerative agriculture and energy efficiency and so on? I think that's the prize, really. That's the opportunity, right? So
I was sent an article this morning from my brother-in-law in the UK, and it was around the farmers over there are really concerned because so much of their money comes from EU subsidies. Mm-hmm. And if the Brexit thing, that's going to disappear.
Yep.
And they're going, so without the subsidies, we're no longer viable. And there's a whole lot of, these small farmers. We've got this countryside that we want to look after because that's predominantly what the subsidy is for. And, in the middle of this article is that, New Zealanders, why can't we be like New Zealand? And they were putting New Zealand on farming on a pedestal. And, the irony was that came from the subsidies being cut.
Right, yeah, sure.
Yep. And they're going, so what are we going to do? Because where's that money going to come from? And, I look at that and go, that was in a reputable, journal in the UK, and people notice what we do.
Yes.
And I believe we've got a responsibility to lead the world on all sorts of stuff. And we need to start taking ourselves a bit more seriously, I think, and go, we can do stuff, so we should do stuff, and understand that the ripple effect is not about 4 or 5 million people in New Zealand. The ripple effect, goes way beyond that. And we do, like the work we're doing with, in the Indigenous space, and you look at the way Māori are regarded across other Indigenous people around the world, right? They're leaders in that space.
Yep.
And they understand that mental. But, and then other things, we just drop the ball and we go all soft. And it's bizarre. I don't quite understand why we front up on some things and we don't front up on others.
No, well called. I think the things we aren't can, again, expect that idea. Your weakness, well, maybe that's a strength. So we're not the United States. So therefore we don't have this enormous geopolitical footprint and all these really complex, hard relationships. And we can just turn up and say, well, don't worry about us because we've got 4 pop guns. I don't think we've got an Air Force anymore, have we? Certainly need to worry about all that. But we can go to, is it Bougainvillea? We went to and just contribute to peace talks and so on because we're straight talkers and we're constructive and we're not picking a fight with anyone, I think. So you can play to that. Look, I'm with you. I think there's a real place for a clear, reasoned voice that just attempts to be constructive, particularly in the transition that we've got coming. And it's always a bit discouraging when we don't back ourselves and say, "Oh, this looks a bit hard. Maybe we'll go to the edge." It's really interesting. aspect to, I don't know, national confidence maybe. If you go to, I remember years ago going to Thailand, and you get a bus tour somewhere, and they say, now please don't point your feet at people, because in this country that's considered rude, and but just that quiet confidence in welcome to our house. In our house we don't wear the shoes inside, or it doesn't have to be apologetic. It does, it's not proving any particular point. It's just having the confidence to say the way we do things here is this way. And I often concerned at this idea, oh, what do we think? Well, that depends what the United States thinks. And they do that, therefore we're doing the same thing. And I don't see why we wouldn't have our own opinion about what we think about women voting, but maybe the way the economy works, or the taxation system works, or limits on how frequently you trade coffee beans, or there's a whole lot of aspects of the way you run the world that we could choose different ways of doing that. And we've got a track record of doing that quite well if we back ourselves to do it. So that'd be a great aspiration.
Yeah,
get our mojo back.
Anake, you've had the opportunity to work with a number of young entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, the likes of Anake Goodall, and you're involved with Little Yellow Bird. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to see this generation coming through who have got this drive to do things differently.
Yep. They'll sort it. They have to, firstly. I'm a big fan of the next generational cohort. They've got values, and I think people like me sort of got their security. We did other jobs, and then we came back, and then when we could, we had the luxury of some choices, then we chose our values, and that's what we do. These guys are saying, well, you can stick your corporate job, Harv,
yes,
because you're doing shit that I don't agree with. And I'm going to go
and
walk. And it's not coming to work for you at all. Exactly, or I'm leaving. And I'm going to go over there, despite the fact the pay is different or whatever, but those values really resonate, and that's what I'm about. I really rate that. It's they're more attuned to, I'm not investing in bloody cluster bombs with my KiwiSaver account. Just don't even bother mentioning it. And they're already, it depends on which country you talk about, but I think the so-called millennials are already half the workforce, right? So I think those in control and power and boards and so on completely miss the fact that society is changing rapidly and is made up of the Anake Goodalls, and
there's lots of them,
and the Sams. And
they talk to each other.
Exactly,
they talk to each other and
generous.
Yep.
No, I'm with you. And despite the fact it's right in front of our eyes, it's often missed, I think.
It's interesting when I first really started to engage with them with collective intelligence, and it was a bit confronting initially, because they were very smart, they were very vocal, and they would challenge me on things they didn't like, and I'm going, and some of them on scholarships, but that didn't matter. They still had a point of view. And it caught me out initially, and now I expect it.
Yes,
and they're really refreshing, because they do know what they want, and they will tell you what they want.
Yep.
And once you get used, and I don't think they're coming from a place of being greedy or whatever. It's generally from a higher purpose point of view.
Yep.
And it takes a bit of getting used to, because certainly my generation, we didn't come from that. I don't think. We were consumed with our own little world.
I think you and my generational cohort are often challenged by this, I'll use the word loose, because it's often how it's perceived, way that they conduct things, and it's not as uptight, it's not 14 years of budgets, and it's not governed to death and so on. It's sort of far more organic and open to change. And so I see a lot of people go, oh, I don't know, I understand this. I don't understand the way they're operating or making decisions, and it doesn't look professional, unquote, given the frame that I've come from. But I think it's not only is it well intentioned, I think it's very effective.
We year before we became accredited as a B Corp, and somebody said,
"Good man, well done."
And thank you.
Congratulations.
It is
a big statement.
It is not an easy thing to achieve. Somebody said, why, what was the motivation? I said, well, there's lots of them. It's a great commercial framework and, it's not a feel-good thing. It's your business runs better once you become accredited. But it's also a signal to the younger generation as well, that they notice and they understand that there is ethics within the business, and you've got the stamp, international stamp, that says that you're an ethical company. And you're not saying it, somebody else from outside has validated it, and they notice these things.
Real credentials. I personally believe that in the future, companies that don't have these credentials won't be in business. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Because we can no longer accommodate all the businesses that don't meet these tests.
I saw a great thing sent recently from Harvard, had done a study saying that companies now, and they mentioned Unilever and a number of others, their valuation is determined by their ability to attract and hold talent rather than the hard assets that they held.
Yep.
And that if they couldn't attract and hold talent, then the value of the company diminished substantially.
Yep.
And I thought, yeah, that's quite different than, say, the 1985, where there it was all about hard assets.
Yep.
And the likes of General Electric were it. Where now that gets changed very, very quickly, and who's the talent that you can attract? Yeah.
So that's your employment brand, and your B Corp really informs your employment brand, and that speaks directly to the talent that you can get into your organisation, and that's why some companies will win, and those that can't attract it, well, where can they go? Really?
It's interesting. We've just attracted a very talented marketing person to the business, and we said, why did you take this job on? And she said, I saw you're a B Corp.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, there you go, there it is, right there.
And you got the benefit of a positive filter, right? That person was attracted to your organisation because you got shared values, which are explicit. And so your chances of this being a wonderful relationship both ways are probably already 4 times higher than just some random.
Yeah, and look, it was interesting. Tina's her name, she's fabulous, and she said, so is there a 90-day, do we do the 90-day thing?
Mm.
I mean, piss off, why would we want a 90-day thing? Right? I'm not interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it was just like, no, forget it. It's we're aligned here. And so there's no need for this 90-day trial. And she went, oh, okay, all right, I'm cool with that.
Good stuff.
So it was fascinating. So Anake, just we need to wrap up at some stage because it's getting dark.
Indeed.
But what sort of going forward? What are the things what are the projects that you've got on the horizon, or the things that you still want to work with?
A great question. I don't know about you, but I find it's almost a perpetual question. So you might be on this board and attempting to help Anna Gunther for a while, and then you come off that, and the question is, where's the need or opportunity or match with skills and instinct or aspiration on my part and an organisation trying to do something? So this does change. Particularly what I'm doing now is so set up a charitable entity, Seed the Change here, Kākano Hāpai, the idea of seeds that lift up the human condition. And in a way, this is an attempt to manifest or articulate more specifically the beliefs and things that I've learned or suspect are true, or from the various experiences I've had the privilege of being involved in. I'm really interested in an idea fundamentally, which is you and I can espouse what good buggers we are, or we believe in this, or we like that. It's a really interesting test, though. What do we do as opposed to what do we say? And then, so you just dig into that. How do we use our time is what we do. And just creating a frame where I can put more of my time into this exercise, this entity, and seeing how we might contribute to the big issues of the day. That way, rather than doing it in the name of somebody else, whether it be Ngāi Tahu or the New Zealand government or anyone else. So I guess it's it's a little bit of been tentative with words, because it's about, I think, confidence is what I'm skirting here. It's about being confident enough to say, I, Anake, think that this matters, and I'm going to go there,
Right.
and I'm going to attempt to do stuff about it. So look, what we're doing, we're interested at a high level in helping manifest a more sustainable, equitable and joyous world. So this is,
Hang on, just say that again.
so more sustainable, equitable and joyous world. Sustainable is about environment, biodiversity protection, and so on, divesting out of fossil fuels. Equity is about human opportunity and trying to remove unnecessary barriers for participation. So we've got clubfoot, a whole lot of things like those personal experiences like that. But you think of people who've got cataracts and a Fred Hollows operation for $25 return site. That's an unnecessary suffering, right? So there's the idea of equitable. What can we do to help people? There's opportunity, get opportunity, enjoy opportunity. And joyous is about interest in two things. Humans aren't just technical animals, right? What's the unemployment rate or what's the health statistic? We're poets and we write songs and we dance. So what about human expression and how do we foster that? And a particular lens there interests me is how do we find the sweet spot that attracts us? What's the thing that makes Ian Harvey sing, and what's the fire in your belly? And the sooner you find that in life, then you're going to be a happier person and you can be really contributing to the big issues of the day. So you just think of programs run with students that have inspirational speakers and just search around to help those students find the thing that resonates with them so that they might get on that track sooner rather than later. So sorry, a bit rambling, but those three headings: sustainable, environment, equitable and joyous. And look, very small grants, literally $200 or $300, small equity investments, ventures that get up and going. Time, might be on a board, might be a bit of management contribution. And we're interested in whether we've got mates that we can bring to bear on issues or campaigns or projects as well. And one way we do this, I've got a bank account, right? If you want to start up a thing, don't worry about the bank account today necessarily. Don't worry about trying to get charitable status. I've got that. It took almost a year. It cost thousands of dollars. So as long as you're doing something which is genuinely charitable, then I can receive $5 from this person over here who's a fan of yours. I can bank it for you. I can give it to you, and I can give the donor their tax receipt, and you don't need to worry about any of that drama at all. We'll just take over that administrative load, and you can concentrate on what you're trying to get up and going. So you could think about it as an incubator for ideas that could matter. And one last throw the dice here. Really interested in helping fund it by investments in, for example, Pledge Me and Little Yellow Bird, right? So these are entities which are themselves regenerative, doing good work through the value chain, supporting the communities with which they operate. If they're successful in the long run, they'll throw a dividend, which would mean that there's more money to invest in entities like that, help them get up and going and or to give away to causes as well. So that's a sort of frame. It's a bit of a theory. About 2 years in, we're getting some momentum in the thing. Got a big program around awareness of hepatitis C, the issues to do with that, and the fact that there's an opportunity to completely eliminate the virus, no cost, 100% success, etc. So there's a cluster of stuff around that. Helping good friend Michael Mail at the moment launch Drinkable Rivers, the idea that we'll just get a lot of profile on the water quality in our rivers, and this idea of can you paddle in it safely without the river eating your gumboots because it's so toxic or whatever, or can you swim in it? Well, why shouldn't we be aspiring to drink the water in our rivers like you and I used to? And so we're starting with the Avon in Christchurch. It's going to be about profile and to see if we can encourage a movement of focus around the positive aspects of stewardship of these resources. So a couple of big projects like that, a number of small ones, do what we can to help people where we can, connect up to like minds, and putting more and more time into that project.
Long way from freezing worker and Invercargill.
It is, and it's exactly the same script. Which community are we in? Who are the people that are attempting to solve a problem or reach a place that might be characterised by less suffering or more opportunity? And what does it take to mobilise that idea and make it real and get it spinning? And in that sense, it's exactly where the freezing worker was.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Mobilise, Anake, that's the key word, isn't it, is how to mobilise people.
We've got to do the stuff together. The ask is big and getting bigger. The time's getting shorter. We need each other.
Okay, mate. I think that's a perfect note to round off on. Anake, it has been an absolute honour. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. I know it's not your, what's the word, natural space necessarily to put yourself out there. You work from behind the scenes, which I've always admired, but it's been an absolute honour to interview you this afternoon, and thank you very much.
It's a privilege, mate. Thank you, and I love your work.
You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff, and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular Collective Intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.